Hello and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who makes me afraid for what happens if this podcast ever winds down and there isn't a sequel.
Tim Longo. Yeah,
just saying.
It could happen.
The kooky, dark characters, you know, sometimes they don't make it back.
Yeah. Who knows what's going to happen to you?
I should say we are actually three veteran game developers this time.
Yes,
because we've been talking about Republic Commando. We happen to know some of the people who worked on that. So why don't you introduce our guest?
Yes, let me welcome Harley Baldwin to the show. Very excited about that. To jump into her intro, to give everyone an overview, Harley started working in the industry as a technical artist on her first project back in 1994, I believe, at American Laser Games, and then on to Her Interactive. She then joined LucasArts in 1997 to work on Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine, which is where I met her. I was a level designer on that with her. And then in 2000, she swapped over from art to level design and design in general, and joined us in Star Wars Starfighter and Jedi Starfighter as a mission designer. She then jumped over to RTX Red Rock on that project as a level designer, and after that came back to join us on Republic Commando as a level designer there as well. Obviously is why she's on today, among many other good reasons, and then left with all of us in 2004. From 2004 to 2008, she worked at Crystal Dynamics, where I eventually met back up with her again, though we didn't work directly together. As she worked her way from an assistant lead designer to lead designer on Tomb Raider Legend and Tomb Raider Underworld, both wonderful games. And then from 2008 to 2012, she worked as a lead designer at places like Demiurge Studios and design director at Nihilistic Software, working on franchises such as Rock Band, Resistance, Call of Duty, lots of stuff there. And then eventually moved to 2K Marin as a creative lead for them. And then 2014, she joined the trailblazing Schell Games and became the VP of design. I don't know many of those, so that's awesome. And then running that entire department, mentoring, cultivating their culture, their design culture, and working with their various clients where she is today. Harley's also been a speaker at various game development events over the years, covering topics around games for change, to team management, to critique, and all sorts of stuff. So we are very excited to have her on today. Thank you for coming, Harley.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's so exciting to hear you two again.
Well, there's a way to hear us a lot if you really want to.
Especially lately, our podcasts have been extremely long.
But we're here to hear you, and so is the audience. So one of the ways that we obviously often start, especially with your awesome career, is just to talk about sort of, how you got into it, what your background was, and, and kind of the early days of getting into game development, because people.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear that, because I actually don't think I didn't know about these two places before. I thought you started at LucasArts, so I'm very curious about that myself.
Well,
so how did you get into all of this nonsense?
Boy, it was a winding path. So, I was in college, and I was a photography major. My whole plan was I was going to move to New York after school and be somebody who did high-end photo printing for like fashion photographers and architectural photographers.
I did not know that.
The summer before my senior year, somebody broke into my apartment and stole all my photo equipment, which, as you can imagine, was somewhat of a blow to my plans for my senior thesis.
Holy cow.
As I was sitting around thinking, what am I going to do about this? A friend of mine said, hey, I'm going down. I was living in Albuquerque at the time, which is, I grew up in New Mexico. And a friend of mine from high school that happened to live in the same apartment complex as I did said, well, I'm going down to this local company that needs some temps. And they said, and a guy that we went to high school with works there, and they said that that all we need is to be able to play solitaire. And I was like, well, I can play solitaire. I can do plenty of stuff because I spend all this time, messing around on the computer. So I went with her. That's right. I crashed her interview. I'm not sure this is a replicable entry into the industry.
Into the industry.
And they were like, yeah, sure. Here's it was before Photoshop. The program we were using was called PhotoStyler. And this was for Her Interactive, which was actually a sort of subsidiary of American Laser Games.
Okay.
And the game was called Mackenzie and Company, and it was maybe the first video game, certainly PC game for girls. And there was a section in it where you went shopping, and you needed to be able to sort of try on different pants with different tops. And so after cutting out hundreds and hundreds of pants and tops and stuff, I went to the programmer who was doing it and it said, okay, how are you going to know if this is a tuck-in pant or a tuck-in top or a hangs over top? And he looked at me and said, a what? And I was like, well, sometimes you tuck your shirt in and sometimes you don't. And I looked at him and realized that he always tucked his shirt in. This was not something he had ever considered. And he was like, oh, that's going to make it harder. So I sat down with him. We worked out this way where we essentially made a naming convention that would tell him what function each piece of clothing had and allow him to write essentially a matrix according to name that said how you would layer these things on when you tried them on in game, right? So I found that to be fascinating work. And every time one of those came up, I would jump into it. And pretty soon, the game didn't need temps anymore, but it did need devs, and they offered me a job as a dev. So I enjoyed that for a while. We shipped that game, Mackenzie and Company, and then I spent a little bit of time working. I don't know if you all remember Mad Dog McCree or Drug Wars.
Oh, I remember Mad Dog McCree.
Yeah. On the 3DO. I spent some time actually cutting out frame by frame. You frame the good guys in green and the bad guys in red, and then it knows if you shot the wrong person. So I did that, and at some point I thought, there has to be a faster way to do this. Every frame, there's just they're not moving that fast. So I had learned this word interpolate. I went to the program. I said, if I did every 10th frame, could you write a program that interpolates between where this red square is and this red square is and the size of it, and then I can go back and correct rather than having to draw each one. And he said sure, and so I did that. And I was just totally hooked. So when it came time to go back to school, I realized I don't want to do that anymore. It helped that was the year the first consumer digital camera came out, and it was very clear. And it was a huge success, right? And it was very clear to me that my whole plan for being a high-end photography printer, that's gone. And also there was it was much more interesting to me to keep solving problems like that. So I just kind of dug in. After that, we did what is the name of that game?
I saw Vampire Diaries on there.
That's right, Vampire Diaries. That was the next one, and then we moved over to Nancy Drew stuff, and that was when Her Interactive was bought by a company, I believe, in Seattle.
Yeah, they're located in Bellevue now. So
still big, really big.
Yeah. So during the beginning of that transition, that's when I decided, you know what, I'm going to California, and I moved to San Rafael and started sending my resume to LucasArts.
So I want to pause really quick because this was an unanticipated, awesome intro for before you even get into design. We haven't really had a technical art specialist on, I don't think. Hopefully I'm not
we haven't.
misremembering.
No, I don't think so.
And I think the awesome thing about what Harley just did is she broke down a discipline that is an unsung hero of any team. And in what's dawning on me right now is when we started working together on Indiana Jones, which he's about to talk about, that was the first time I think I also sort of realized what a technical artist was and how important they were and what kind of work they did, that probably a lot of people listening don't really even realize, there's sort of a difference between, I don't know, a texture artist and a technical artist, or a 3D artist or something like that. And so thank you for doing that, because you, not only was it some of the early games, dabbling with this stuff, but you gave examples of actually how technical art needs to think differently about making games than any other artist. So thank you. That was a nice.
Yeah, and you must have been a bit of a trailblazer as well, because I know that we were fighting to have them in the. Mm-hmm. I will say into the late aughts, early 20-teens, and I won't say where, but people who read my resume will know, I was still fighting to have technical artists, and they just didn't have them, which was astonishing to me. 20 years in or whatever. Well, at that point, I guess 10, 15 years into my career, to come on a team without a technical artist of that scale was like, huh? How do anyway, but that's two trailblazing things. Both technical art, but also her interactive was very trailblazing as well.
Yeah. It's interesting because when I started in technical art, there was, you're not talking about rigging or skinning even. You're talking about things like, how do we get this video to use the same 128 color palette all the way through? There was a program called Debabilizer, which you had to be a little bit of a wizard to be able to make your whole video look good. It's the same high level process, right? You look at the kind of data that the programmer needs in order to implement things in game, and then you look at the kind of data the artist wants to make, and you try to figure out how can you most efficiently smush that into that. But it's changed a lot, right? It's much, much more technical now than it was when I started.
But it's very much a problem solving. It's both an engineering and an art discipline to some degree, or overlaps pretty heavily with both. I mean, you have to have a engineering mindset and maybe an artistic understanding, I'll say, or whatever.
Yeah. But it is problem solving and translation. It's the glue, right, that puts kind of all that stuff together, and often impact level design as well. So
Yeah. So that's actually a good transition, Tim. When I started at LucasArts, I started on Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine, as you know, and probably 2/3 of that job was actually making sure that the level designers had the assets they needed, organized and in a format they could use. Because we had a lot of level designers and we had a lot of artists, and there wasn't anybody to translate all of those assets, and I spent an inordinate amount of time doing that. The rest of the time I spent working on what would today be essentially a locomotion systems designer, right? I was working on taking Indy's animations and figuring out how to blend them from one to the other when the character moved, in order to make it look most natural. And what we would call rigging today, though at that time it was figuring out where each of the parts of the model needed to rotate and how they needed to stick together. We didn't even have rigs at that point. So
yeah, wow. Yeah, and that was that engine was coming from the Jedi Knight stuff, right, which was not even skinned, right? I feel like Indy was the first game that LucasArts did with a real-time 3D character that was actually kind of skinned and was starting to approach a more like mature 3D, like you said, rig and just structure and things. From Jedi Knight, which was largely a first-person shooter with very simple polygonal characters running around. So yeah, okay. So what? So let's see. I guess next is sort of talking about getting directly into design from there. Like, what was the transition? Where did that come from? I mean, I was there and I remember some of it, but what's your, give us your thinking at the time.
Well, there came a point on Infernal Machine where I had figured out how to do all the things I needed to do, and it was essentially just processing assets using known procedures, right? So frankly, I was a little bored because the thing that I had loved about the industry was that there were always new problems to solve. And I looked around and there were people solving new problems every day, and that was the level designers. And every single level designer on that team was incredibly generous to literally let me sit behind them and watch them use the engine, and watch them solve problems in the engine until I understood the tools well enough that I felt I could do it. It's just started raining here, so if it gets loud, my apologies. I think every one of you had to show me how to do, what was it, a 3-point slice? Do you remember those?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Reed was sort of the master at using those in various ways. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would, after work, I would stay late and I would just try to build stuff, architecture that had impressed me, or I would find pictures and just try to build that in the engine. Not even building level design puzzles or pathing or anything like that. Just can I make this room in the engine? And at one point I felt like, okay, I decided I wanted to make the office, so I made the whole office. Rethought as a sort of 3D shooter map. And once I did that, I thought, okay, this is what I really want to be doing. And so when I heard that Starfighter was looking for designers, I threw my hat in the ring to see if I could get picked up on that team. And lo and behold, I did. And it was nothing like what I had thought, because it wasn't doing architecturally based 3D level design. It was a space flight sim shooter. But I think that was honestly good, right? Because I didn't have to think about both the gameplay and the space, which are both huge considerations while I was learning design. I only had to think about really the gameplay, the rhythm, the interest curve, that kind of stuff.
Right. That's what I was just going to ask is, what differences between the, the types of designers, mission design versus level design that you saw. So yeah. And there was a lot that we did on that team that I think really heavily influenced me. A lot of it came from you, Tim, actually. In terms of, like, I still to this day find ways to, by hook or by crook, get my designers to play each other's stuff and just talk about it. And whether or not that leads to action items or not, that comes from my time on Starfighter and how much I learned from every designer, watching them play my stuff and playing their stuff and hearing them talk about what they were doing and what their intent was. I found that to be just incredibly helpful. And awesome. I still do it. We have a thing we do now at Schell Games we call Designer Play Day. And once a month, we ask people to host and they ask designers to come in and play their stuff and talk about it. Or if they don't have anything live to play, here's my design doc or here's the prototype we're thinking of making. And does that sound fun or whatever? So. Awesome. That's great. Yeah. Super, super useful. So let's get into Crystal Dynamics, which was a huge, awesome step. We'll come back to Republic Commando, of course, once we get to the game. But when you got to Crystal, sort of what was that transition like? Because you were starting to actually take on whole new roles in design world, which was exciting.
Yeah. It was a bit of a shock because I was coming from a place where, on Republic Commando, I had been a level designer, as you know, and I had done a little bit of technical art there, at least helping set up the technical art pipeline for some of the maneuvers. When I went to Crystal, they had a really interesting interview process where a big part of it was they sat me down with a bunch of leads just to play their prototype and discuss it. And up until that moment, I had been essentially talking with them about coming on as a level designer. After that process, they called me up and they said, "We would like to bring you on as a lead systems designer." And I was like, "What's that?" And it turned out that it was a lot of the stuff that I had been doing on Indie with locomotion design, sort of figuring out and working with engineers and art. How do you take the mechanics that you're making and make them beautiful and make them smooth and make them something that the player can really understand, right? And so that sounded like an interesting challenge, and I jumped in to do it. So I was a lead systems designer on Tomb Raider Legend until there was a bit of a reorg on the team, and then became assistant lead designer there, which in a lot of ways was really just lead systems designer plus making sure that those systems were well used in levels, right? That I was working really closely with the lead level designer at the time. Because it doesn't help if you make great systems or great mechanics and then level designers don't know they're there or don't know how they can combine. Right. So lots and lots of test rooms at that point, right? And spreadsheets showing how to level up the mechanics that the player is asked to use, etc. So,
cool.
That kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting because that reminds me of the sort of advocacy work that you were doing on Republic Commando with the maneuvers, really, right? I mean, it's a communication, as you pointed out, a sort of a technical design role to some extent. But also like, here, think about doing this with them sorts of questions, right, as well. So, yeah, it's sort of a natural extension.
Yeah, I think those are the kind of problems I've always been drawn to, and so it's not really surprising in retrospect that that's what I ended up doing there. And then we went on to do Tomb Raider Underworld. I was a lead designer there, and that was again a whole new set of challenges and interesting problems, and just a huge team. That was almost 100-person team. And it was just a really fascinating experience making that game. Yeah.
And then for sort of the demiurge, nihilistic, and sort of 2K sort of era of the career, what are there some? Because there was such a variety of things there, from not only just roles but just franchises and gameplay genres and things like that. Are there any ones that kind of come out at you that you would want to mention as something that stuck with you, influential, or inspirational, or anything like that?
The interesting thing about all of those roles was that the through line for them was not the genre of the game, but was that they were all in established IPs. And that was something that I had to learn to get good at, was understanding an IP, figuring out what was special about it, what players really loved about it, finding ways to evoke those same moments without redoing them, right? Because nobody wants to play the same thing twice, but you don't want it to go so far away from what you expect that it doesn't feel like the same IP anymore. And I guess doing Tomb Raider had actually really prepared me for that, though at the time I didn't realize it. So that was kind of that what I focused on at that part of my career. The peak of that being working on an XCOM inspired or XCOM universe game that was not it was not a strategy game. It was a third person real time squad based shooter, which sort of brought everything together. Right. It was the beloved franchise. It was the squad based stuff. It was the third person stuff from Tomb Raider. It was in a lot of ways sort of the rhythm and the tactical part felt a lot like a Rock Band game, weirdly.
Cool.
So yeah, it was really interesting to sort of bring all of that stuff together and yeah.
And that was Black Site, right? Was that the main?
No, that was the Bureau.
Oh, sorry. I always get those two mixed up. Yep. The Bureau. Yep.
And then the extremely well-known DLC for it, which was fun to work on, but nobody bought.
That happens. So then, I mean, Schell Games, another great move and big jump, and obviously, you're overseeing a whole department. And I mean, can you give, people may or may not be too familiar with Schell Games because they do such a variety of things, but could you also maybe just give a little bit of overview about what that company's about and then also kind of what you're doing there?
Yeah. So Schell Games is an entertainment and education game company started by Jesse Schell, who is a veteran of VR, was a creative director at Disney's VR studio many years ago. And Schell Games does a lot of educational games. We do a lot of VR games. We do a lot of location-based entertainment, especially sort of the digital portion of those. We have recently started working more and more in health games, both screen space and VR. And we're often the company that a hardware manufacturer comes to when they have a thing that seems pretty neat, but they can't figure out how to make a game with it. Often they'll bring it to us, and we'll either do, a prototype or sometimes a releasable product for them. The reason that I like it is because it's exactly what's always drawn me, right? Is hard problems, interesting problems. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean that's the interesting thing about the company is it's influenced so many things that people, like you said, don't even realize. But it's just I'm always so impressed with hearing about what types of things people are working on there. So awesome. And you're overseeing the whole department there, basically design department, I assume. Yeah,
that's right. We're at about 25 people now, and still growing. We've got every kind of designer, and every designer can do every job. Though certainly everybody has preferences that we try to make sure that they can meet with such a diverse cast of experiences that we work on. We need to be sure that everybody can really serve almost any sort of thing that they might be on. Mm-hmm. It's fascinating because it's a little contrary to the way most companies run, right? You have your specialist level designers, you have your specialist systems designers, etc. But one of the things that is true is that because everybody is very conversant with everybody else's work, it makes it a lot easier for people to consult each other. You don't have to build up a shared vocabulary because they already have it. We certainly have people that are known as sort of the experts or somebody who's particularly talented at this or that, and they get consulted a lot. We have a very agile and flexible design team. We have people who have literally gone from making sword fighting VR to making an app to help you manage your stress, to making an educational Daniel Tiger game.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that is a very unique way to have a design department for sure. It's exciting to hear that there are different things going on, because I think that the old school way is a bit archaic and I think needs to be revisited anyway. I think we all think that. So again, trailblazing. Awesome. So let's back up a little bit and talk obviously about what our subject is today. And if you can, thank you for playing through, which is great. Our guests don't normally do that beforehand, so that's awesome. You also mentioned you had found an old design doc that we had for the game for Republic Commando. Is that true? Did I hear that or read that someplace?
That is true. It is true. When you reached out, I thought, "Hi, I wonder if I still have that thing." And I looked around and I found it. It's not the full one. It doesn't have any of the levels in it. It's basically what you all handed me on day one when I started on the team. So it's got essentially the character sheets of all of the enemies. It's got the weapons layout of all the weapons. Excuse me. It's got some charts about what enemies are in what levels. And then it stops right before it gets into levels. And then in the back half of the book, larger than the design doc itself, is all of the Unreal tutorial and command and usability stuff.
Wow.
Which was, because I don't know if you remember, but I didn't know Unreal at all when I started on the team. I think a lot of the designers didn't, because LucasArts had been using proprietary software pretty much exclusively up until then.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, almost entirely exclusively. I think the one exception was the Galactic Battlegrounds, which had been the RTS Age of Empires engine, I think. I think that might have been the only exception up to that point. I'm pretty sure everything had been start from scratch or start from prior product, in the case of Indiana Jones or Outlaws, for that matter, something like that, where using a prior shooter engine or something. Yeah.
I remember it being a huge controversy as well. At least from my perspective of not yet being on the team, there were people who were 100% sure that it was going to fail because you couldn't solve the problems that you needed to solve in engine fast enough because the person who had written the engine didn't work there.
Right. Oh, how times have changed. But that is often the perspective of folks in those sorts of situations still today too. I'm sure we've all been through some of those conversations, but even modern conversations. But you always have that kind of dig your heels in perspective. So what were the early days like coming on to RC, especially? So you came from mission design, which you had done 2 games on, and now you're sort of some of the stuff that you said up top that you were really getting excited about when it comes to spatial design combined with gameplay. We did skip Red Rock. So you did spatial design on Red Rock, right? Yep. RTX Red Rock, which I briefly mentioned, but we didn't talk too much about. So it wasn't fresh. It was coming in with sort of the second 3D game. So you're already getting to be, more of a veteran there. But what were the early days of RC that you remember, before we get into some of what you played and what your thoughts were on what you played?
Sure. So one of the things that I remember really struck me was how vocal everybody was about the systems. Just because levels had only really started to be built, and already weekly, if not daily, there would be email threads about, well, what if they did this, and what if they moved like this, and how could this seem more realistic, or etc. And I remember looking at thinking the level designers are trying to solve problems that I haven't seen level designers try to solve before, and it felt really open. that the conversation was constantly about, this doesn't quite feel like it's working, or maybe this could be richer in some way if it did something more like this. I found that to be very, very interesting. That there was just this sort of excitement about the possibilities of what we could build very early on. And I think when I started, there was really only, there was I think it was Troy Mashburn was working through the very first section of one of his levels, where you go through some caverns in Geonosis, and then you see that sort of bridge, and you're taught to use the sniper rifle by shooting across the bridge.
The bridge, yes.
Right? And there was
it's before that, Tim, not that bridge. No, the bridge where you shoot the explosive, and there's like a couple Geonosians on it, and you shoot the explosive and blow up the bridge.
Oh, right. Okay.
That's kind of it's sort of a stealth moment. Yeah.
Right. And so we like, I think my second or third day, we all got together and everybody played that on their machine, and then we got together and talked about it, and like, how is it working? How is it not? And we were both talking about it, like, how is it working from a gameplay perspective, but also and Troy's like, this was really hard to set up, and here are the reasons that it was hard to, here's the stuff I had to spend a lot of time on, etc. And there were programmers in the room taking notes about, like, oh, that was hard to set up, and maybe we could, and very quickly features started coming in that would help us, and there was already this kind of momentum that was a little bit amazing to me. Even though there was really just this one example of a working place, right? That was something we were all kind of drafting off of very fast.
Right.
Yeah. Well, one demo is worth a million design docs, as they say. and yeah, I mean, I can remember those sorts of conversations, like things like, I want to know what tags are connected to what, like if I click on a tag to draw lines to other things that are tagged with that sort of thing. I think was how it basically worked, right? It was like, oh, when I fire this event or whatever, where is that going to go? Like, just so I can visually see that things are wired properly, just to give folks a sense of like what those features might have been in the tools that weren't in the tool set to begin with. Yeah. And
I have been on a lot of teams where level designers' tendency to be really visual was a little bit like, it felt like a little bit of a problem, or people were a little tongue-in-cheek about it. It did not feel like that at all on this team. It felt like, okay, you guys need to be able to see how things are hooked up. We will show you how things are hooked up.
Yeah, engineers are very different, because we work in a text medium constantly. That all we ever do is read. So we just, our natural approach is, oh, well, let me give you a text box to do the thing that you want, and that's very much how Unreal was at the time.
Yeah.
And they've got away from that, as time has gone on, and there are a lot more sort of visual scripting approaches in it now. But back in Unreal 2 era, it was still very much like, you open up a dialogue, it's got all the properties names on the left and all their values on the right. And it was all text, very little even like sliders and things. So it's a very, very different kind of model.
Yeah.
So do you remember sort of some of the early days of your design process as you were getting levels, and as I think we talked about on the podcast a little bit, and we'll definitely want to make sure we talk about the final level, which was your level. What other levels did you have, and kind of what were some of the early, both like exhilarating moments of getting going, but also everyone hits snags or has some challenges or whatever, like Troy was talking about with using the tools. Do you have any memories of any of that stuff in the just as you're getting going?
Yeah. So I had 2 levels initially, I think. A little bit so part of this was a little bit hard for me when I was replaying, because there were parts of other people's levels that I was like, oh, I must have been the designer on this, because I can remember tuning this or that. But also I was on the team a little bit later than some people, and so I ended up fixing a lot of bugs, especially sort of cover bugs and optimization. And so there's some part of my brain that it took me a while to remember, no, this wasn't my level. This is one that I just sort of did that very final polish home. But thinking through it, and that was a weird moment. I was like, wait, no, this isn't my level. I didn't
Right.
set this up. Thinking through it, I had two levels initially. One was the Trandoshan slaver camp, which I did ship. The other was there was a sort of assault through a ravine that we were going to use. I don't know if you remember this. We were gonna use this as this is how we're going to do jungle. And
oh yeah, this is vaguely
right?
remember. Yeah,
yeah, you were going to go up on an overlook and then look over the jungle and then go down into the ravine and
okay, yeah.
Two things happened. One was that it became clear pretty quickly that we were never going to get that version of Unreal in optimized to where we and to deliver that wild promise.
Right. Yeah.
And
so yeah, we were prototyping, experimenting, doing sort of art passes and stuff to figure out what we could do.
Yeah. And Pat Cirque, he was making all these gorgeous jungles, but it was basically one room's worth of jungle at a time that we could get, and then Brett would look at it and be like, "That's not gonna run." We would try something else.
He always says that.
Yeah.
Oh, I rarely say that. Come on now. I'm very often the guy who's like, let me find a way to make this work for you. In fact, I can remember, I had forgotten about this, but that we had a somewhat contentious meeting between engineering and level design about that slaver camp level you're talking about with the spotlights.
Uh-huh.
And when I was playing it again, I thought back on that meeting where I had to say, whoa. Our job here is to find a way to help them do what they want to do, not to tell them they can't. Because your ask, I can remember at the time, your ask was not big. You were basically like, I want it to feel like we're trying to be stealthy, even if we're not. But someone was not hearing it that way. Someone was hearing I need to make a whole nother type of game now. And I was like, whoa, hold on. What can we do? Let's figure that out. I mean,
it's also true, to be fair, that my initial take on that was I want the spotlights to move around, right? And I want if the spotlight, if things haven't been triggered, if the battle hasn't been triggered, I want the battle to trigger immediately upon having the spotlight sweep over you, no matter where you are. So I was, and then to keep playing on that and bring this whole new mechanic into the level. And that's not what we ended up shipping because it wasn't necessary to, as you say, give us the feeling of trying to be stealthy and sneak in there, right? It certainly does help to shoot at every spotlight you see in that level, but they don't move. There's only one that moves and it's a fake,
Yep.
Yeah.
I remember.
Yeah.
More smoke and mirrors.
Indeed.
Yeah, I think there's a good little mini example in there though too that I was hoping we would get to, and I want to any memories you have of it. I'd love to hear more of these sort of small stories. That for the listeners, we've had level designers on or people who have done level design from time to time, but we don't often get into, especially in this era, level designers really had a lot of ownership over their own levels when it comes to pitching what the level was going to be. Like myself or someone in a leadership role might have there might be a brief someplace and there might be high level concepts and a flow over the course of the whole game. But when it comes to the bread and butter and the bread and butter and the meat, I'm just using all sorts of food terms here. How it actually is going to play out and what the themes are and the details, of course, for sure. That was largely coming from the level designers. And so you were just kind of giving an example there, a great example of wanting to introduce something that probably wasn't necessarily even in the brief or coming from me or something. It was coming from you. And there's still some of that these days, but teams are so big on on teams like this and on games like this, and and often things are kind of overwritten and try to be figured out beforehand. So the flexibility isn't what it used to be, at least on big teams. Obviously, smaller teams have a lot more flexibility. But do you remember sort of some of the? I mean, we need to get some of the other levels too about some of your ideas about what a level designer pitches, and how they get into the details of what they want to do versus what they were asked to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I certainly remember the spotlight thing, and I remember being crushed for a while that it wasn't working the way I wanted it to, and then either it was a play test or I was just watching somebody else play through it, and I realized standing back from it, and this is a thing that happens to designers all the time, especially level designers, right? Standing back from it, I realized there's no way the player's ever going to know the difference between the spotlight moves and knows you're there or doesn't. We can set that up. We can set that experience up without needing that whole system at all. I can remember a few others of those. One of the ones was Jesse Moore taking your high-level note that the ship should feel a little creepy, and just running with it in all of these really subtle and wonderful ways, right? Like the body falling out of the vent above you, and and like swapping over from these are showing you the droid dispensers that had been already burnt out before you see and have to deal with any droid dispensers yourself. Just all of this really, really beautiful craft work, and thinking, okay, that's the sort of thing that you want to do, right? You take this one note that you're trying to sustain through the level, and you just figure out what are all the tools that I can apply to that one note. I still love that level, playing it over again, and I'm just experiencing that, that same creepiness, even though certainly as a player, my expectations of the level of fidelity have gone up in a game like that. Every tool was just used perfectly to create that feeling and to make me feel like, no, I'm going to need to crouch walk through this whole experience.
I was surprised too. I don't remember how much we talked about it, but I was surprised at how well the team did at really giving that feeling to the player, because it really still holds, even though the fidelity's lower, it still holds up as a, I think the audio especially helps a lot in those sections. And like you said, all the tools that Jesse and others put in, but it all comes together pretty well still. And I was impressed with the team's work in that regard. For sure.
I think when I was playing that on stream, it was actually in the ship section where somebody commented like, wow, this really still holds up. It's 15 years later, but visually it still holds up pretty darn well. And certainly the sort of feel of the space held up really well. So it was fun for me to revisit as well.
There's a little bit of a natural segue there too. I wanted to at least open the door to, okay, you just played through, like we played through. And you actually listened to the podcast too, which is like extra credit for our guest. So what, coming back to it, I mean, I'm sure you haven't played it for 10 plus years as well, right? Or maybe even since we've shipped. Like what was your experience coming back to it and playing the whole game?
Well, I mean, I guess the first thing I should say is that I played it on easy, like I play everything these days, because because my life moved on, right? I used to play everything on normal or hard, because that was just what you did as a game developer. But at some point, my life became a lot more complicated, and right, it's hard to play everything on normal and hard when you have to wait till the kids go to bed before you can even play because the game is too scary for them to watch. Yeah. So that was the first time I had played through it on easy, and I gotta say, it is just about right. for my expectations for that difficulty level, right? I was during the final level, I was certainly having a talk with a level designer of yore in some places.
As was I.
We all had words. In our head.
A few words were exchanged. It was definitely a spike in difficulty, and not always in ways that you want it to be, for sure. I was trying to pack a lot into that level. I had big dreams for the kind of experience it would bring home. But overall, it was. There were only a few places that I found really frustrating. And I had this funny memory. The first one was in the Valley of Death. It's in the first level. That first big spike in the first level.
Yeah.
Yeah. I died there and kept reloading right from right before the first time I died. Oh, and I remember what it was. It was the Geonosian. I don't remember what they're
Elite.
called.
The flying ones.
The flying one, yeah.
Elite.
The first time I played that level, I also got stuck there. And I got stuck in some weird loop where I had almost no ammo, and I kept, and I hadn't yet realized I needed to make myself a few reserve saves and etc. And I was sitting there playing it, dying and playing and dying, and just laughing because it was the same experience that I had 16 years ago or something.
And we narrowed that down. We're pretty sure that's Troy's, right?
That's Troy's.
That?
Yeah. That is absolutely Troy's, yes. Yeah. Because I had words with him at the time and would have words with him now.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I totally get it, right? He wanted you to have a peak experience. He wanted you to feel like you could prove that you had mastered the weapons that you had.
Right.
And he wanted you to really have to work to feel the brotherhood with your squad. He wanted you to care about them, and if they're not able to really have any consequences, then you're not going to care, right? It is true that I walked out of that experience caring about it, but I think I had to play that 5 or 6 times before I was able to get through, even on easy. It was just a huge spike, right? And it's just learning to okay, what is the key? What is the key? Oh yeah, okay, those guys are the key. Let's take them out with my pistol.
Right. Exactly, yeah.
Right, and then I can run around and heal everybody, and then we can deal with the rest of this. Yeah.
Right.
We got an email from Reed as well about the hangars, which was another spike for me in particular, and leading up to the bridge, and he kind of talked through his thought process, but it's sort of similar. Like, this was the story for me of what I was trying to say. I wanted to, at first you're going into an area where you have a little bit more dominance over the area, and then it's maybe 50-50, and then you're definitely behind. Like they have dominance over the area, the Trandos or whatever.
Yeah.
And that was his story of the level, and he's like, but it was still fun for me when we shipped. So it was probably too hard, right? Because that's right. That's one of the problems is Troy could play through that, no problem. And that was his defense at the time. I was like, Troy, you know exactly what to do, down to the second. I don't. And I've played it a billion times already, and I'm still getting my butt kicked. And he'd say, I made it easier. And I'd be like, not feeling it. So I get it.
I actually remember getting a bug from QA saying that they couldn't finish the last level on hard, and they wanted me to prove that it was doable. And
I was like, learned their lesson on Jedi Knight.
So I invited them up, and they came and they sat behind me, and for 2.5 hours I showed them that I could finish my own level on hard. When I was done, they just looked at me, and I was like, okay, yeah, I'll pull it back a little bit. And then, before I had even checked in that work, I got word that Julie Lagerman had indeed finished it on hard, and they did not need me to make those changes.
Holy cow.
Oh, that's a perfect way for that to end. Okay, no, we got it. We did it. It's okay. It can be done.
That
it was a
is
different
hilarious.
time.
That's
It was a
hilarious.
totally different time.
That's a great
Yeah.
story of just, I can just envision them sitting there around your desk as you're playing for 2 hours, and then they're like shaking their heads and like,
Right,
no,
yeah,
you're not going to do it.
You can feel the judgment, which is not helping you play better. Yeah.
That's great.
It's funny too, because a lot of these sort of things that we're talking about, like how we have to make a story of the level, but it has to come through the gameplay, because we didn't have a lot of the sort of the ancillary, mocapped scene between two characters that makes you understand something about them type stuff, right? That was sort of starting to come into the industry, right? With basically the next generation. This was basically the end of that generation. So there was a period soon after where we were having like Uncharted, and characters were holding each other's hands and helping each other up and all of that stuff, and it looked pretty fluid and it felt pretty fluid. And we just did that by messing with difficulty, for example. Right? It's like to accentuate the importance that you have to figure out how to play this thing, instead of so it's kind of interesting. We were really on the cusp of those sorts. I mean, Tim and I have talked even off air about like, how would we change some of these things, like how would we approach some of these things differently now, as in terms of that.
Yeah. And then like the two sort of related topics that maybe I want to make sure we have time to talk about. Obviously we want to talk a little bit more about the last level, but maybe as a segue into both topics, we could start with, because we talked a lot about maneuvers on the podcast, and as a level designer, somebody who's, as you mentioned, not only helping to technically get them going, but also having to work with them from a gameplay perspective. Like, do you have any recollection or sort of like some of your interactions with that system and likes and dislikes, or war stories or what have you? And obviously pretty critical for the last level, so maybe kind of combo those two together and maybe talk about maneuvers in the last level.
So I remember thinking that it was, we had by that point in the game, we had already used up, I thought, as many free tickets to give them a hint about whether this should be quiet or not, that we possibly could, right? I mean, how many door breaches had the player done at that point, right?
Right.
And so I felt like people are pretty much just going to want to go in there guns blazing, and it doesn't make any sense given the context of what's happening in this level that you would ever sneak in, really, right? And so so talking about door breaches, it was just trying to find ways to tell you the story of what's going to be happening in the next room in that moment that the door opens and you see that grenade go in, and you see what is there or not there to receive the grenade. And then I think also we were able to change what kind of grenade the doorman would throw, which sort of gave a little bit of a hint, as like, if you happen to have a bunch of these, that would be good for you right now, player. So I remember agonizing a great deal about that, because there were a lot of doors in that level, because it was such a huge level. It was the only way that we could manage the streaming, to have lots and lots and lots of doors, and lots of hallways. And to this day, even though I don't think it's even really true anymore, I think of Unreal as the doors and hallways engine.
Yeah, I don't think you're alone in that one.
No. But I think it has changed a lot, substantially, right? They've done a lot of work to overcome that. But still, if you're streaming, that may be something you have to look at. In terms of the rest of the maneuvers, my intent in the last level was that I wanted to give the player lots of choices about how they wanted to approach every fight, and I wanted them to be able to use just every bit of firepower that their squad could, right? Because this is the last moment with your squad, and you're as you battle into each quadrant, you're losing a squad member, which means that whatever the rest of the squad does is that much more important. So I wanted to have lots and lots of maneuver opportunities, more than you could do with the 3 guys or 2 guys or 1 guy that was with you at any point, so that you could really have a moment to think about, okay, you've practiced with all these, you know what they all do. What's the enemy in front of you? What do you think is most important? Find the kind of maneuver you want to put somebody on and put him on that. And that was both from what weapon were they wielding, but also from a distance perspective. There aren't that many places in that level where I could get a lot of distance, but where I could, I wanted to have some stuff that was close up and some stuff that was far away. Though I did hear you two complain about it, the one squad member in a dwarf spider droid room was exactly that, right? It was hoping that the player would.
And I probably did it badly.
Oh no, that's a dwarf spider droid, but I know this enemy. I know what to do. I know I've only got 1 guy, but if I put him on this, it's going to be the most effective thing. And then I must have left, I don't know, 30 rounds of anti-armor in that room, just hoping,
right.
Like, if you get it wrong, you can
by the way
pick all that stuff up, and yeah.
Yeah, and I think that was, I mean, as I am notorious for not remembering most things, as Brett will joke about and mention pretty much every episode.
It's not a joke.
Yeah,
anymore.
I know. It's not. But I mean, I do have vague memories of us talking, you and I talking about that final level. And, and Brett mentioned it in previous episodes as we were talking about the game. This game was like a lot of games where a team has done something for the first time of this, type.
Yeah.
We were just figuring things out by the time we were shipping. We were just figuring out like what these paradigms were that we wanted to use. And I have good, still to this day, positive memories of you and I sort of discussing like, okay, this is obviously the culminating level, and maneuvers being a good example of one of the things that we were bringing to bear on the medium. And, we do want to leverage them. We do want to sort of expand and show the possibilities of what you could do, and I think in our minds at the time, before all the shenanigans at LucasArts was happening, we were thinking, okay, this level will be sort of an example of what the future could hold for this kind of game, and we didn't get that chance, of course, but I do have fond memories of discussing and you pitching, we need lots of options. We need to show the potential of what was happening, of what we kind of only figured out at the end, really. And then it just happened to also have this sort of character moment too, that was put in there that, that ended up that Brett's joke in the beginning of this episode reinforced yet again. So yeah, I just have fond memories of that process working with you on that, because I think it was a good, though hard, I think it was a good representation of the goals that we discovered, I guess I'll say, right? I couldn't even say that we had them at the beginning because we didn't know what we had, but we did discover them, I think, over time.
Yeah. And I got to say, I was in a really perfect spot because if you remember, that level wasn't originally my level, right? That was Schmitty's level. Right. He's the one who did the layout, the architecture, and the high-level plan. And then Art made it, and then when Schmitty moved over to being lead level designer, you all brought me in to do the actual hookup. So I had essentially the shell, and I had the full list of enemies that were totally mature, and I had 6 weeks before we hit beta, which...
you're in the perfect position. How
right?
could
I knew
be wrong.
Right between that rock and that hard place. Right squeeze.
Yeah. No, it's good. It's good to remind us of that fact as well. Thank you.
But I mean, it was good, right? I knew every system. I knew every enemy, except I didn't know the Geonosians. And frankly, the reason they're in there, so I heard somebody said something like an old home tour of the enemies. I definitely was doing that, right? Part of it was there were enemies in the game
that was me.
I had a chance to work with, and I wanted to work with them, and I was going to do it. But also, once we decided on we're going to drop off one, because we didn't have the plan for the turrets in the initial, right? But once we decided we were going to drop off one commando at each of the turrets, and so you were going to drop down, it felt like a real opportunity to say, okay, player, you've learned all this stuff. You know how these systems work. You know the rules. All this stuff that was really hard and freaky at the beginning of the game, you can handle it now. And so we're just going to go ahead and put you in a place where you have to handle it. And you can use all these tools, right? So we gave lots and lots and lots of ammo. There's so much ammo in that level. It's over the top. We took away your squad members one by one, and every single enemy in the game is actually in that level, which is a little ham-fisted, but as a player, you get to go through and be like, oh, I know what to do. And then you get to what should be the easiest enemy in the game, those little Geonosian, squidlet things. And they just kick your butt. You just have to read through the whole thing, right? Yeah.
I spent so much time in it.
Yeah. You love that room. Yeah.
The funny thing about playing through that for me was the first time I played through that, I didn't die the first time. This playthrough, I didn't die. I get up on the turret. I start shooting at the ship above me, and just as I realize, wait, I think I'm taking damage, I die. And of course, there's no squad members, and I'm like, "What killed me?" And I realized, oh yeah, I must have just left one of them behind, and it's just been taking little pieces of me this whole time.
Oh, funny! Yeah. How funny! Yeah, I love the kind of best of nature of that level, or just a little bit of everything in there. Yeah, and you're right. There was a shell of it when you did inherit it, but I still think the final sort of vision of it was yours, and I just appreciated that process, and I think it really, I still feel like, and this isn't, I said this a lot during the previous episodes, this isn't me tooting our own horn on this, but I still think as a culminating level, it still really works pretty well, apart from some of the difficulty spikes. So it's like, it was fun. It was fun to go through it again. So one of the sort of topics that, not to put you on the spot, but do you have any Republic Commando sort of like takeaways that you use today, or that you think about ever? Or, if you don't have any, that's fine too. You kind of mentioned a couple maybe early on, but how do you look back on RC these days?
There's lots of them, right? I have spent the rest of my career trying to understand and find that creative space where everybody knew where we were going, and everybody was using whatever their skills or talents or interests were to get you closer to it, right? There was a remarkably remarkably not dedicated or passionate, but functional team. People talking about the things they needed to talk about, people suggesting things, people hearing suggestions. There was no hint of design by committee. It was very much your vision, but everybody felt very much empowered and able to serve it and to deepen it, or enrich it in some way. So that's been a big thing for me. Is just trying to understand what created that and help other teams find that moment. There's a few others. One thing that I guess I have become slightly infamous for saying is nobody reads your docs. And it's true, like just nobody does, right? You have to find ways to have those conversations before it's time to sit down and do the feature, whatever it is. Most people are better in conversation with other people, not everybody, right? But finding ways that people actually can get the information they need is really important. And I think I did it to you then, and it was one of the moments that I realized, like, you wrote a doc about something, and I went to you and started asking all these questions, and you're like, "Did you read the doc?" I'm like, "Of course not. Nobody reads the docs. We want to talk about it, right?"
And thus the quote began.
That's right.
Yeah.
So that was a big one. Certainly, getting designers to play each other's stuff and talk about it, and all of that is definitely been a big part of it. But then also the thing in talking about the difficulty, right? I have talked with every team I've been on since that moment. I have talked with the team about, I know that you feel like you're just getting to the point where the game's difficulty is right, and I can promise you that that's not the case, right? That you have become a full expert at this game in a way that you can't expect any of your players ever to do, and so you essentially, what you think is normal difficulty should be hard or nightmare. And that we need to find ways that are not totally nerfing to sort of bring that down. And there's a lot of stuff there, right? There's just like, when do you turn off God mode? As an example, try to do it earlier. Just add that friction to get in, because I've certainly seen teams, wander too far down that road. And then obviously the very most important is watching people play your stuff, and understanding that what you think is obvious is totally obscured to them.
No, it's good. That's a good recap. I kick myself because of this whole difficulty topic, and I don't think I mentioned this on the previous episodes, but this was around the time when I was heavily getting into usability and playtesting, just as an interest. I was trying, I and others were trying to get a department going inside LucasArts at the time, and just meeting a lot of resistance, like an official one like Microsoft had. We did get to work with Microsoft some on that, because we were an Xbox game, but and we would do our, pizza orgies, or, things like we would do on the team and stuff within LucasArts. So there was some chipping away of that, but it wasn't as official as I wanted it to be. So I was really excited about this topic. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to actually work at Microsoft eventually as well. But looking back, as much as passionate as I was about the topic, to have the game ship the way that it did, I just, I feel so bad, because it's like I didn't practice what I preached in that regard, right? We should have had more playtesting. We should have had more watching.
Well, I mean, I think it was also our pool of applicants, right? I mean, we were often having people who were coming onto the team were playing the game and getting that sort of Kleenex tester kind of feedback, and you have someone like, I don't know, Pinecone, Jeffrey Sondon Kung. That guy's hardcore gamer. Like, he came on and he totally could play the game. He had no real problems. So to some degree, like, we had people coming on who weren't really representative still of the general audience, even though they hadn't played the game yet. So it's still, I think, and that, I mean, there's nothing we could really do about that with what we had available. So
for sure.
I think there's a certain amount where we can't, as much as I'd like to give you a hard time about it, there's only so much of a hard time. I
gave you the opening. It's right there. It's
in post.
Yeah. It's fair. And some of this is obviously hindsight 2020 kind of stuff, because, to your point, the pool, having continued the interest in playtesting across my career since then, and really pushing for it in all sorts of ways, and learning so much since then and still today, the pool of playtesters is one of the most critical pieces, so it's like, I guess it's a looking back lesson that I regret not learning earlier, because we should have identified that the pool was incorrect. But anyway, we're learning now. That's what part of the podcast is for. So good.
It's also true that you in some ways you might have been busy breaking other ground, right? Like, I don't know if you have realized this. It took me a few years to realize it, but do you remember at the end of every milestone, you would send out that mandatory, what are 3 things that we would change about the game, and what are 3 things you'd change about the process thing?
I have no memory of that.
You have no memory of that.
Yes, that was an important thing that we added on this project.
Yeah. You would walk around and you'd be like, you haven't filled out your survey yet. Please fill out your survey. And you would make sure that every member of the team filled out that survey. And it was just that 3 things that would make the game better, 3 things that would make the process better. That was well before any kind of agile or scrum process in the industry was even hinted at, right? I mean, I made 2 more games that were full-on waterfall. Yes, we know what game we're making, and it fits in this design doc, and it will take exactly this many weeks, kind of stuff. After that, probably spent, 4.5 or 5 more years making games with that process before we realized that we might need to be a little more agile. But you were integrating agile processes that didn't have names 5 years before anybody else was. And so you might have been a little distracted, right? And in some ways, I think a lot of that, what happened was you were getting that kind of user testing feedback you needed from the whole team. It's just that the whole team was a little bit more expert on the game than was ideal, right? Because of that constant making sure that we filled out the surveys.
That's a good reminder.
I remember.
Yeah, well, I don't want to. Oh, go ahead, Harley.
I remember very clearly the milestone where everybody sent the feedback that, like, I keep getting lost in the levels, and also it doesn't feel like a squad game. And you all went away on your offsite and came back like, we just had this great idea. We're going to default to, the aggressive stance, and they'll be in front of you and show you where to go, and you'll see them, and it changed everything.
Yeah. That was a big moment for sure for the project.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we want to be respectful of your time. Is that where you're headed, Brett?
I was. I also wanted to say we don't want to give you too much credit, Tim.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, we were all dabbling with agile-ish stuff at the time, trying to figure out how to integrate it. Yeah, it was definitely.
I just don't want your head to swell. Yeah. I mean, I really don't care what the history is. I just don't want to be too nice. But I do want to at least give Harley a chance to talk about what she's working on now, or might have shipped recently that she'd love people to check out.
What we've been doing a lot more original IP at Schell Games in the last few years, and that's been super exciting. We shipped I Expect You to Die, and then we added 3 levels on as sort of free add-ons, and that has been awesome. It's been really fun to delve into VR, talk about problems to solve, a whole new generation of problems to solve.
And that game specifically is huge. I mean, I feel like it's a trailblazer on its own too.
Yeah,
congratulations.
That has been a great experience. It has been a great experience. I'm very, very proud of the team that shipped that for sure. But also, we just announced that Until You Fall is coming to PlayStation VR. And that has been also really just super spectacular and fun. And also is the majority of the exercise that I'm getting these days is playing that at home. It's, we had a team come together and figure out how to make sword fighting feel real and fun, how to make you feel like you really know how to use a sword in VR. It has just been spectacular watching and helping and advising and getting my butt kicked by that game all the time. And I think we actually have the difficulty correct. So I'd definitely be interested to hear if people think that's true.
We have it. It's official. It's been stated. So 10, 15 years from now, we'll come back and we'll see if that's true. Awesome.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Well, congrats on those. Yeah. And thank you
that's great.
So much for coming on. This has been a delight.
Thank you. I also want to say thank you for being the first person I met at LucasArts who wasn't on the team I was on. So I appreciate that. I've remembered that ever since. I don't know if you remember that.
No.
Oh, we were both on the we were on the Marin Airporter. I remember the bus that went into down to SFO. I don't know where you were going, but we were sitting in the bus. We were near the front of the bus, and I looked over at you and said, "Hey, don't you work at LucasArts?" And we ended up talking all the way down to, we weren't even on the same team yet. We ended up talking all the way down to SFO. Would have been February of 2005, I believe. So shout outs to you for that. I remember it fondly. I learned how you came by your name, because I didn't know your name before. I was like, oh, that's an unusual name, and so et cetera, et cetera. But yeah.
You mentioned in pre-show some pie situation as well. What's the pie situation?
You don't remember the pie thing?
No, I do. I wanted you to kind of share a little bit about it.
Well, I'll set it up. I told Tim that he needed to tell the level designers that we had to have a meeting. This was on Starfighter, and it would have been in like May, June, I think, so 9 months or so before it shipped, maybe even a little later, but around that. And I said, look, we need to have a meeting on Friday. I want you to kind of talk it up a little bit and, maybe give them the fear of God or something, and just take it away. Harley, what happened do you remember that getting set up for you folks?
The pie thing. So it must have been in March. Wouldn't it have been in March?
It's possible.
I think it was in March. You showed up with pie, and you were very excited because it was Pie Day.
Oh yeah, that's possible. Yeah, that it was Pie Day. Yeah,
it seemed a lot. It seemed a lot for like, oh, we need to have a meeting for Pie Day, but you had pie, and that was good. And then it was either at that meeting, or it must have been at that meeting, that you mentioned that you were going to be a father.
Oh yeah, could be as well. Yeah, it could be. Oh,
Yeah. So then.
Yeah, maybe. Okay, I could believe it.
That.
Yeah.
Then X number of months later, you did become a father, and we thought it would be very funny to ding and dash a pie to your house. So we talked Tim into taking a pie to your house, putting it on your doorstep, and ding and dashing.
I did not know that Tim did that. That Tim was the bringer of the pie. I've not known that this whole time.
Tim, were you not the bringer of the pie? Am I wrong?
I might have been.
Yeah.
There's no way I'm going to remember.
I think it might have been like a web grocer thing.
I might have been. No, it could have been me. But let's keep going. I mean, we'll...
So, yep. So then there was the ding and dash of the pie, and I remember worrying afterwards, like, oh, nobody told him. And if I was a new parent, I might worry about a random pie, but I'm sure it'll be fine. And then, fast forward 8 years or something, and I am at home resting with my first newborn, and there's a doorbell that goes off. We were living in the Tenderloin, so like there was a lot of security to get into my building. And my husband goes downstairs, and he comes up and he opens the door and he walks in and he says, Harley, do you know someone named Pret Duville? And I said, oh, did he send us a pie? And my husband said, no, he sent us 7 pies.
Oh my goodness. I forgot it was that many.
I remember the email, the thank you of like, oh, it's really been fun, because every time he opens the refrigerator, he says, that's a lot of pie.
We ate nothing but pie for like a week. Every time somebody came to see the new baby, would you like some pie?
I was a father, but I guess still like a guy at that point, because, I was like, I had to hit the minimum, order $50 or something like that. I'm like, well, clearly I should just order more pie, not like diapers or something. That's something you could actually use plenty of. But yeah, sure, why not? 7 pies, no problem.
We did eat all the pies.
Yay!
We got through them. So, and we didn't have to cook. I mean, I will fully cop to, I didn't eat anything but pie for quite a while.
I mean, Scott, many of the food groups. So
yeah.
Awesome.
All right. Well, with that, thank you so much, Harley. And I need to maybe send you some more pie.
Awesome. It was really good to talk to both of you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Welcome back from the break. That was a great conversation with Harley. It was really nice to talk to her after quite some time. I have not seen her in years. I feel like I saw her at 1 or 2 GDCs or something, which is funny because she's only like an hour up the road for me. An hour. It's like a few hours. But yeah, it was a good chat.
It was great. Yeah. It's same for me. It's been a while. I think I might have seen her at 2K Marin at some point. After, I guess that would have been after Crystal, and then but she was on the East Coast for a while, and then now in Pittsburgh. So yeah, it's been a little while.
We still consider that the East Coast.
Is okay. Is that considered?
It's not the Midwest. I mean, it's Western Pennsylvania, but it's pretty far from the coast. But I still think it's the Mid-Atlantic, right? It's Pennsylvania.
My geography, is not great. So
yeah, that's right. I once took a drive with somebody, and we were passing through Connecticut, and that person was like, we were headed to New Hampshire, and they said, "Have we gone too far?" No, we have not gone too far. We're coming from Philadelphia. Anyway.
Yeah, it was great to catch up with her. She's done. I mean, since I've worked with her, she's done so much, and so it's just it's awesome to see how she's progressed.
Yeah, and she's another of a small cadre of people, and yourself included, who were on all the projects I shipped at LucasArts. So it's like her and Troy. I don't even know who else. It's a pretty short list.
Yeah, interesting. Good point. Pat Cirque, maybe?
And Pat Cirque. Yes, that's a good call. Yeah. For sure. But yeah, it was. She was terrific to work with back then, and she's still got the spark of Harley.
Yeah,
I always remember how just great she was to work with. So it was wonderful to have her on, and we thank her again for taking some time to chat. We just covered so much cool design stuff.
Yeah.
And she's been in that end of things and starting in sort of mission and level design and sort of iterating and starting with technical art. I mean, just so many great perspectives. It was great. It's great to have her. And the other thing actually I wanted to say, and I had meant to say this last week, and it kind of hit me after just kind of looking back after our conversation with Jesse and David. Like I look back at this time on my career and I'm like, actually Dave Collins is another one, all 3 games I worked on. I look back at this time in my career and I go, man, I got to work with some great people. I it's just funny because, I look at these, these people and, they're giants, they've all been around as long as we have, and I worked with them at, in my first gig in the industry. And I don't know. I just feel really lucky when I think about that, like just what good projects I was on, what games we shipped and just the people I got to work with and, how they impacted my career, just starting out and working with people like that. So I don't know. It's just great because a lot of what gets you through, we kind of talked about it a bit in reference to Republic Commando. A lot of what gets you through is the team that you're working with, because it can be very tough at the end of a game, and especially under the adverse conditions that game involved, that were unique, or at least uncommon. To have just a great team of people around you is gold. So I just feel really, really lucky, not just with the people we've interviewed, but just in general, looking back at that time in my career. How lucky I've been. So anyway, thought I would say that.
Well said. No, I agree. It's, I think for me, you were already kind of heavy into programming before you came over. So, and had studied it and stuff. So, but for me, I had come from theater and I had no concept of game development or anything. And I think one thing that I always need to remind myself of with the early LucasArts days is, especially for someone who had not worked at any other company and had been at my first tour of duty at LucasArts was 9 years, so that's actually pretty long time for the industry. And so my only perspective was there. And then I leave LucasArts, and I've been fortunate and lucky enough to work at some great studios since then. But LucasArts definitely was a unique place, and really lucky to work there as my first job. Both for, like you said, the people that were there, but just the opportunities that we had. And I think the other thing that I think LucasArts, specifically because it was LucasArts, attracted great people as well. You know what I mean? So, and that's I'm not trying to say that you and I are great for being attracted there by saying that, but I'm just saying like the caliber of people that would want to work at LucasArts. You know what I mean? Because it wasn't necessarily easy to get a job there, and so I think, to your point, like the chances that you're going to work with somebody pretty stellar, there was pretty high, because just the whole company was quite good.
Yeah, and that's a point, actually. We've never really talked about something like hiring, and we probably won't, but I do want to at least say that one of the things about when you work with A people hire A people, B and C people hire B, C, or lower people, but A people hire A people, as we can give people grades. And I don't mean to dismiss anybody, and certainly not everybody was perfect by any means, as we were kind of already saying. Yeah. But just to say, like, when you work with really good people, that increases the chances you'll continue to get to work with really good people, even as they move on to different places in their careers. If you get a chance to work with them again, they're probably working with good people again because they're good people. So it's just, I don't know. It just kind of, it's a virtuous cycle, which is not something we often talk about, but it is sort of its own genuinely positive feedback loop. When you get to work with good people. So,
yep. Good point.
So all good all around. Anyway, so just a remark I had, because I know we're going to have at least one more, maybe two more of these interviews. We're still nailing down the scheduling and who, when, and how, but I wanted to at least shout that out in case we don't get to that this week and have to start another game, and like I lose track of it. It just kind of came to me again to talk about it. It was something I mentioned on the stream the other day after interviewing the two audio guys. Yeah, just like, man, I really lucked out.
Yeah,
I really did. So. Anyway, thanks to all of them so far, and let's move on now. I've been putting this one off. Producer says I can't do it anymore. We have to do it this week. Last week the interview went long, and the week before
excuses,
didn't know the song.
Excuses.
I've had plenty of excuses, and now I've had to set them aside. But I will say this review from Blarg 42 is kind of in two parts, because not only did he send in the singing review, which I did the beat poetry version of some weeks ago, and will now do the singing version. He also posted an actual review that is associated with this. So I wanted you to read that part before I do the singing part.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. Good old Blarg.
Good old Blarg.
We love you. Subject, my favorite podcast from Blarg 42. Blarg-42, if that is your real name. I've listened to a lot of gaming podcasts through the years.
I think he had to put in the dash because somebody already had Blarg 42, so there was somebody else named Blarg 42.
Oh no, there's more than one Blarg 42.
Not in our hearts.
Not in our hearts, yes. Only one in our hearts. I've listened to a lot of gaming podcasts through the years, many of them great. But for me, Dev Game Club takes the proverbial cake easily. I always make sure to never miss an episode, and I've even listened to some multiple times when I get in the mood to try out one of the many games they've featured throughout the years. Probably the best way to listen is to play alongside hosts Brett and Tim as they make their way through some iconic titles from the past, But even when they play something I've never heard of, what's anachronox? Is it contagious? I still find it enjoyable, as the insights and expertise they bring to the table are second to none. Also, I've heard rumors that they have quite the fondness for the late 90s anime theme tunes. Who knew? Or maybe that's just my wishful thinking? Question mark. Tongue sticky outy face. So I want to officially go on record saying that Brett does have a fondness for late 90s anime theme tunes. He doesn't talk about that very often.
I don't know this. I don't know them, but I have a fondness for them.
Yes. Whenever he hears them, he loves them. So take it away, Brett.
I will indeed. All right, here. I got to cue it up so I have it in the background in my ear so I can sing along. Here we go. I want to be like Cloud or Squall or an honorable frog. I know I have to play them all, although it can be a slog. Random battles along the way are a never-ending grind. But worth it to reach the day Tim will have them on his mind. RPGs, it's them and me. They're my Final Fantasy RPGs. Oh, you're my best friends, and your length I will defend. RPGs with art so cool. Nobody does stats like you. You'll grind me and I'll grind you. RPGs, gotta play 'em all. Yeah. Here it comes. Digging through dirt on a chocobo is my favorite mini game. Chrono, Vivi, Ayla, Robo, how'd you come up with these names? Memorable and always long. Your stories drive me wild. But why must Kuja wear a thong? It scars my inner child. RPGs, it's them and me. They're my Final Fantasy RPGs. Oh, you're my best friends, and your length I will defend. RPGs with art so cool. Nobody does stats like you. You'll grind me and I'll grind you. JRPGs, gotta play 'em all. And there we have it.
I don't know where it's ending. I don't can remember.
Yeah, you don't know how long it's gonna. He also sent the whole original song here and a link. So I had that going in my ear. Otherwise, I would lose the melody at a certain point, because there's certain parts that I just can't remember how it goes until I'm actually hearing it. So thank you, Blarg.
Excellent work.
Yeah, that was. I want to remind you that was in defense of your honor after Violet Trudell wrote in a review.
Thank you, Blarg, and I appreciate it. I probably should have done one of my own, but a follow-up prank like that's going to take me years to develop and sort of plant the seeds on. So who knows when that will strike. But thank you for defending my honor, and thank you for one of my favorite lines in a song ever. I'll grind you and you'll grind me, or you grind me and I'll grind you, whichever way it goes. That's a humdinger of a line related to RPGs.
It really is. That's quite something.
Yep. Well done, sir. Yet again.
Okay.
Now that's behind you.
It's finally behind me. I've been approaching that with some trepidation ever since, because I know we have a lot of Pokemaniacs in our audience, both because our audience, you and I were already working when this show was on, basically, right? As the 90s pointed out. So it's just like I've never had time to watch that. But yeah, and there wasn't a lot of streaming or anything like that. I might have caught it. It might have been part of the zeitgeist if I had. But anyway, there you go, Blarg, and others I know who will appreciate that one. Let's move on to some email feedback. to devgameclub@gmail.com. We have one here. I think the first one I gave you is from Oliver.
Yeah.
And I made a note that I cut this down substantially. One thing to do when you send this email, please edit yourself down. I had to take out a ton of examples and things like that because it was just super long. But this was in response to a question we had a while back about difficulty in puzzle games. Why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Puzzle game difficulty from Oliver Uvman. Uvman?
Sure.
Hello, good folks.
UV Man. I believe he's a texture artist.
Got it. UV Man. There you go. I'm sure he's never gotten that one before.
Probably not.
Another type is what I'd call complexity difficulty, which I think can be divided into three measurements: depth difficulty, width difficulty, cross constraint difficulty. To explain those, I'd like to point out that most puzzles can be modeled as constraint satisfaction problems, or CSPs. Okay, this is intriguing. It's usually convenient to figure out the solution backwards. First, figure out what the primary goal is, then figure out the required sub-goals for reaching it. Also, figure out any things you must not do in case any specific actions makes the goal impossible to reach. For example, pushing a box into a corner in Sokoban. Follow the same procedure for each of those sub-goals and each of their sub-goals, etc. Your goals and must-nots become the list of constraints your solution must adhere to. Following this process gives you a map of your puzzle. It looks like a tree graph with the primary goal at one end, branching into sub-goals toward the other end, where there are immediate actions you can start to perform. You can imagine must-nots as evil arrows pointing from one goal to another goal, indicating that if this one is completed, the other one will no longer be completed. So back to our measures of complexity difficulty: depth, what is the longest path between the primary goal and your first immediate sub-goal that you can act on? Width, on average, how many sub-goals does a goal have on the map? And then cross constraint is how many evil arrows are there? In general, increasing... feel like I'm teaching a class.
So yeah, no, and there was more examples and things like that. So there's definitely, again, Oliver, get your own podcast, man. But
I think he needs to do a puzzle podcast.
Yeah, really.
In general, increasing any one of these numbers makes the puzzle more difficult. The complexity difficulty can be thought of as the product, as in multiplication, of these measures. A very deep map with no width and no cross constraints is still rather easy to figure out. Increasing all three at the same time increases difficulty a lot more than increasing just one of them. I think a great puzzle game must have both paradigm and complexity difficulty. They both give satisfaction when solved. Paradigm difficulty has an additional quality of giving the player a very magical aha experience when solved. A lesser aha experience is felt when figuring out a vital constraint that finally lets you solve a non-paradigm difficulty puzzle. What I do know is this. As a player, it is almost always preferable to play in such a way that you maximize your number of future viable actions. There is AI research that supports this idea. For games with incomplete information, that usually makes gathering information a top priority. Examples of this are the importance of scouting in strategy games and the importance of exploring pipes in randomized SMB3 speedrun races.
Super Mario Brothers.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Some of his other examples had referred to it. I must have.
Okay, no, that's okay. Super Mario Brothers 3 speedruns, beating other players in a puzzle after all. So if you're designing a puzzle with incomplete information, filling with the player's ability to gather information will certainly be a good way to adjust difficulty. Finding dungeon maps in Zelda games certainly is an example of this. Okay, that's enough of that for now. Thank you all so much for this fantastic podcast, both to Brett and Tim and to all the other listeners. What a treat each episode is. Stay strong and warm. Regards, Oliver UV Man.
Yeah, thank you, Oliver. I'm
Holy
sorry
cow,
I
Oliver.
butchered it so much. Yeah, it was probably twice as long.
Wow.
There's definitely some big jumps there because he gave examples from things that we played.
I think it's a great.
I think
I get
the paradigm,
dissection.
right? Yeah, the paradigm shift version had been what I had, I think, been suggesting, and he kind of talks about the, your domain mattering a lot about that as well. Like if you're in a game that can support lots and lots of different mechanics in your puzzles, then just adding different mechanics allows for these paradigm shifts and things like that. And but then he's talking about sort of other ways that you could do it even without, Sokoban is a good example. Like there's basically, whatever, one mechanic, move, or maybe, couple in Sokoban, and it's more about how can you do that? Or even like Steven's sausage roll or something like that is pretty, there's not a lot to that game as far as mechanics. Like there's flipping a thing and then flipping it onto a burner, I guess. Like, so it's, whether or not, and you have to cook both sides of every sausage or something like that. And that's like it. Those are all, and everything else is just geometry. So it's the shape of the world and things like that. And then at that point you are thinking about like, oh, okay, well that's a different sort of puzzle. I will note too that my, my stream viewers, some of my stream viewers saw me once get to a puzzle in a JRPG. It was one of the Final Fantasy 13 sequels.
One of the 5.
There were 3, but it was one of them. I think it was -2, and there was a puzzle in there that was was really just a hardcore logic puzzle, though it had a timing element, and I could not solve the puzzles with the time element. I mean, they were very complex, right? So I wrote a Python program to solve them.
Are you serious?
Yeah. So I would run up to the edge of the puzzles before it kicked the timer off, and describe the puzzle to my solver, and then just do the moves it said to do.
Wow.
So
what a programming nerd.
But it was the example. I mean, it was an example of that sort of thing. Whereas actually there wasn't that much to it. But the complexity of those constraints, like if you do this, like before you do this, you're done. Like you can't do the thing. So sort of like the quest games, like King's Quest in particular. Like if you solve certain parts of that before other parts, you closed off, whole parts of the game.
Yeah,
you recall. So
yeah. So the time in that case, the timer is one of the cross constraints. Is what you're saying?
Well, no, it's more that it was like an abstract sort of path, like almost like a maze, but it was a logical maze, and you had to do a number of operations in a particular order. You had to step on this thing, and it would deactivate 2 other things or whatever.
So it's like memorization was probably what you'd have to do to.
You'd have to base it. But the thing was, every time it reset, it changed it as well.
Oh my! Are you serious?
So you couldn't just solve the one puzzle. That's why I just wrote a solver, because I was like, well, once I've missed it, it was way too hard. It was way too hard for what it was. It was literally just to enter this way to get between segments of the game. It was not. It was a poor choice. Anyway.
I bet Oliver solved it.
I'm sure Oliver could. Yeah, Oliver, he was much deeper, more logical thinker than I am. So. Yeah. Anyway, thank you for the mail, Oliver. Sorry to butcher it, and to take so long to get back to it.
Yeah. I loved envisioning sort of the mapping out of a puzzle that he illustrated or described.
Yeah, I should mention too, because otherwise Gothic Chocobo will write in. But Game Maker's Toolkit, he did
don't want that. Stop! Don't prevent him from writing in.
Game Maker's Toolkit by Mark Brown did a whole series about Zelda dungeon design and how they're mapped, and actually Oliver had given an example of like the water temple and things like that, or different maybe some from Link to the Past as well, and he does a similar thing where he's like, well, you can see how these older Zelda games are more interesting because they have kind of more branches in the tree, and later ones are more linear. They're just kind of like go and like there's little things off to the side maybe to do that are optional, but basically it's a fairly linear dungeon design, and explains why he finds some more satisfying than others. So that was his first Boss Keys series, so I wanted to mention that too, actually.
I gotta get to those someday.
I know. Well, I caught up on a whole bunch at one point, and now I'm a whole bunch behind again.
Yeah.
I don't watch a lot of videos. Anyway, I have another email here from Leon Buckle. The subject is Longo Calrisian.
Uh-oh.
He says, get your phone ready. He says, "Hi, Brett and Tim. I really enjoyed the series on Republic Commando, and I'm looking forward to the interviews. Sometimes it feels like the game has been somewhat forgotten, especially with other older Star Wars games still getting multiple patches and RC not a single one, despite being broken on newer hardware/drivers, the bump mapping. Side note here from me, there's a thing that we did that was kind of a little sketchy, but worked on the Xbox and hardware at the time, and was sort of a hack. And drivers stopped supporting it at some point later in the future and doing bump mapping in a real way. Anyway, back to the email. That's why it's really nice to know that some of the original developers still care about it and have some interesting stories to tell about its development. And here's the good bit. I attached a picture of Tim I found while looking through the textures in the Unreal editor.
What?
It's titled Longo Calrisian. Unfortunately, it's not used in the game, so you can't randomly stumble upon it while glitching through a wall or something. Do you have any idea who put it there, and does Tim know about it? Regards, Leon. And I have just sent it to you, sir. He's taking the picture in the actual editor. It's got at the bottom. It's like you're on TV or something. This must be pretty early. This must be when you're still in QA because you have hair.
Let's see. I'm looking at the desk, and I think you're probably right.
Yeah. I will throw this up on Twitter. That's an older PC behind you too. It's hard to say for sure though. But that would be my guess. That'd be my guess.
Oh,
do you know who did that?
No, I don't. I don't. Well, you know me. I mean, I could have known about this at some point, but have forgotten.
Yeah, fair point.
The thing is, it's a texture.
Yeah.
Weird.
So somebody took your picture and just imported it into the Unreal editor at some point.
You know, I will guess that it may be Troy, but that would be my only guess. It could have been Harley. Yeah.
It could be Harley. I thought actually I had mentioned Pinecone.
Pinecone, Greg.
Oh, Greg maybe like you open a door and then there's that behind it as a scare, just like for a funny demo thing that he was doing.
Probably
at some point.
level designer though.
Probably a level designer. That would be my guess. Yeah, that somebody used it as temp art or something like that. Anyway,
to be honest, it could have been any of them.
It's very true.
But probably not Reed. We'll narrow it down. This will be a mystery now.
That we can ask people going forward.
I do not remember that, and that's hilarious.
I wish it had been. If I had known it was in there, I might have used it. Remember, I had that room with the footstep sounds. I would have just made that the floor everywhere.
So you didn't even know it was in there?
I had no idea. No. When I got this email, I laughed like crazy.
So funny.
Thank you, Leon, for that. It was a good chuckle for me when that came in.
15 years later,
a week and a half ago. Yeah,
a player finds it.
That is not a thing that is encouraged anymore. Oh boy, you're getting some real trouble these days.
Yeah.
Where assets that are not expected ship with a game. So anyway, let's continue on.
Okay. Subject: Republic Commando teaches combat leadership, from Sam Thomas. Oh, there's June. Hi, Brett and Tim. In episode 2 of your revisit of Republic Commando, Brett remarked that while slicing a terminal, he couldn't tell what was going on around what was going on around and in the game, and the game could have given him better information. I would counter by saying that the game perfectly simulated the importance of positioning for combat leaders and leaders in general. In their books on leadership, Jocko Willink and Leif Babin talk about the importance of positioning for leaders. A leader who is too close to the action cannot maintain situational awareness to effectively make decisions, while a leader who is too far away doesn't know what is going on. Brett, you should never have sliced that terminal yourself. It's your job to put yourself in the best possible position to make decisions to ensure the survival of your team and mission success. It's really cool to me that games like this can teach real life lessons, perhaps even without intent from the designers. Sam. P.S. I plan to try and play this one along with the cast, but I too was defeated by the timer at the end of Geonosis. That was really tough.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, the wall mission, unfortunately. Yeah, Brett, you weren't being a good leader.
I should learn something about leadership. Dang it! From my
You're
own
the squad
game.
leader. You need to delegate. And one thing. Oh, go ahead.
No, I just do that all the time. Actually, I do a lot of the slicing myself in the game because I'm just like, oh, I know, just run up and do it as quickly as possible because I feel like I can path to it faster. I don't know if that's actually true. It's like I'll go straight to it. I make a beeline, right, and I'll just go do it. And the hangars were that way too for me.
Right.
It's like, oh, I know I got to hit this thing. Let me go do it. Really fast. But it's not always the right thing.
Yeah, it actually jogs my memory slightly because I said delegation. I don't think I asked you this during the series, but how much did you use essentially it's not a maneuver, but essentially activate an enemy and focus fire, having them all focus fire on an enemy?
Quite frequently, actually.
Okay.
Because I knew it was there. It is called out pretty early, make sure to focus fire on, I think it's one of the earliest like super battle droids or something like that.
Yeah, it is, I think. Yeah. The reason I bring it up is as I was going through, and we talked about difficulty quite a bit, of course, and can put that to bed. But the other part of difficulty for me ended up being ammo scarcity. And one thought I had about midway through the game that I think I forgot to mention is that I believe we ended up tuning quite heavily toward that particular, mechanic, meaning because, the squad members don't ever run out of ammo. Right. And so and I don't actually think it was a wise decision because we should have tuned toward giving the player options. If they wanted to fire and kill everything themselves, we should have let them. But I have a feeling and a vague memory that we actually tuned down the ammo some because we knew that people would we didn't know, but we would hope people that people would use that feature. And a lot of the essentially free ammo you'd be getting from just kind of standing back and directing them at firing at multiple enemies or whatever, so in succession. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up as part of the difficulty balancing was probably coming from that. And I think my other vague memories, playtesting wise, people were overwhelmed enough where I don't think a majority of people even use that. Because if they're pointing at an enemy, I think typically we would see them obviously fire at an enemy, right? Versus, clicking on it and then having their friends or their squad members fire at it. So it's just going back to his point of leadership and delegation and, let them do the heavy lifting and you just kind of be the mastermind back there. But the designer and Tim today would say, allow them to do either one if they want to.
The other thing that I think we maybe leaned a little too much into was, and I don't know if this is partly that on the PC we do less sort of aim correction type help than we had done on the console, where that's a pretty common thing, is that we leaned into one of the things you do in development is you build a technology and then you're like, well, how can we use this a bunch and make it worth having made it? And in this case, one of the things I thought of was, we made it so that certain places basically had spots on enemies had multipliers for damage, right? So when you meet the spider droid, it literally tells you, make sure to shoot the red thing in the front. In fact, Scorch has some line about, shoot the red light, got it, or something like that. And, but there's also like, you can shoot the sensor on the top of the thing when it pops out so that it can't shoot missiles at you. And like a lot of the enemies have this. The Trandoshans have the backpacks that you can, if you hit the backpack, it might, take a hole and
if you take the
and shoot 'em
faceplates
up
off
the air.
of super battle droids.
That's right.
you
If you take
can
the
shoot
faceplates
their-
off the super battle droids, you can shoot their gooey or inner bits. And I just wonder if it's harder to hit those, A, because I'm older, and B, because we're not helping in any way on the PC, or we're helping a lot less with the sort of pinpoint accuracy in theory of a mouse. I don't really know if that's the case. I don't remember a conversation about that because most of my play at the time would have been on the console, where we had most of our issues, in terms of memory and what have you. So I was spending a lot of time on it. Also optimization.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just wonder if that's just the case. Like I mean, I remember being quite good at this game at one point, and I'm wondering like if I was just helped a lot, or something like that. But I also felt like all these spots that you're supposed to hit them are too small. Like if they just be a little bit bigger, would help a lot. So that doesn't have a lot to do with the. That doesn't have a lot to with the leadership question, but it was sort of as far as the focused fire. It was like, well, if I could have hit the spot, that I'm supposed to hit on a lot of these enemies, it would have been easier to take them down. So,
yep. And yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Sam, sorry you hit that wall mission, by the way. So,
yeah. Drop down easy if you haven't already, and just restart the level.
We must have shipped cheats in the game, didn't we? To bypass?
We almost certainly did. I don't remember them. There's probably like a God mode or something. And there might be like a go to next level skip, but I don't. Yeah. Those are pretty common still at the time.
Well, I sanction you doing that if you want to continue playing, because there's some good stuff ahead. So, but just turn it off when you get past that point.
I want to give the players options. Don't play this way.
Fair enough. We talked about it on Dark Forces. I was always appreciative of putting the cheats in the options menu. I think more games need to do that, to be honest.
We had done that. We had done that with the Starfighter games, actually.
Yeah, I think, and because of Darren, right? And it's like, why not? Like it's player.
Although they were codes,
player honor, but
yeah.
Celeste is pretty famous for having a lot of that, right?
Yeah,
so.
Yeah. We didn't do it that way. We didn't like allow you to just turn them. You had to know what they were.
Yeah. But you remember in Dark Forces, there was just an option,
just a thing. Yeah,
toggle.
Yeah. Well, so for us, I think that the thing at the time was like that was a thing that we were going to release to like a website or something to get more coverage or. Or whatever. Yeah. Just a marketing thing of like, oh, okay, we'll put in God mode, but we won't tell you what it is. You'll have to go to, GameSpot or whatever.
Marketing.
Yes. All right. Last mail, because now we are starting to go along. The subject is Shadows Cast. It's from our friend Billy, the Second Quest. Hey guys. In the lead up to your Republic Commando series, you mentioned that the Starfighter series cast no shadow at all. That was me. I thought you might be interested in knowing that isn't entirely true. First, though, as a quick note to elaborate on the legacy of Republic Commando, you may like to know that the Republic Commandos actually appeared in not one but two episodes of the Clone Wars. The first was the cameo you mentioned already being aware of, and he says, and I was actually in the audience for that Star Wars Celebration trailer reveal you mentioned.
Nice.
The crowd definitely ate it up. The second was 2 seasons later in the 12th episode of the 5th season, Missing in Action, the third part of a rather strange 4-part arc. This time we actually get to see a commando in action, albeit not one of the Delta Squad members. He would later go on to be a recurring minor character on Star Wars Rebels, though minus his armor. Moving on to Jedi Starfighter, though poor Reti's fate would remain unresolved, clearly awaiting Nim to complete his trifecta by helping save the day during the Battle of Coruscant in that Starfighter III, Jedi Starfighter II, Starfighter Outcast game we'll get one day now for sure, right? No? How about a...
Great title.
How about a spin-off titled Reti Player One instead?
This is brilliant. Oh my gosh. That's great.
The presence of Jango Fett in the game, almost simultaneous to the events leading up to Geonosis where he dies, set off a series of small events. You see, my expanded universe and timeline-obsessed mind at the time just had to figure out how that weaved into the day-by-day events of Attack of the Clones story. So I went about and figured out a solution that worked. And over the next few years, that hobby project eventually expanded to become a day-by-day timeline of events during the original pre-3D show Clone Wars multimedia event. What can I say? I like making timelines and solving puzzles. But that obsession isn't really the point here, I swear. I retained an affinity for JSF and its cast, owing partly to their being the origin of my pet project, but, of course, for the qualities of the game itself. It's not a perfect game, but it was fun and solidly in my wheelhouse of Star Wars flight sims and arcade flight shooters like the Rogue Squadron Battle for Naboo series. Anyways, a year or two later, I had the fortunate opportunity to make a few minor contributions to the expanded universe canon, and, inspired by that affinity for Nim's crew, slipped in a reference to, quote, a pirate group from the Carthax system involving some misadventures of R2 and 3PO revolving around the accidental use of an escape pod. Long story short, that incident would go on to be the in-universe inspiration for the droid's escape at the beginning of the original Star Wars film. While I'm sure Tim will enjoy the lore ad more than Brett, I think you both may appreciate the fact that because of it, indirectly and through the looping of time, the Shadowcast by Jedi Starfighter is what allowed the inciting incident of the entire Star Wars franchise to take place. At least until Disney rebooted everything and made that legend. Still, you had a good near-decade-long run there. However, even more important than that, Jedi Starfighter made one thing crystal clear. Calling down orbital strikes on targets should be considered a mandatory quality of life feature for every video game, regardless of genre or franchise. Super Mario Brothers? Orbital strikes. King's Quest? Orbital strikes. Forza? Orbital strikes. Tetris 99? Orbital strikes. Animal Crossing? You're darn right. There should be some monkey fighting orbital strikes. And every time we can then cry out, for Reti! From Billy, if that is, in fact, his real name.
Wow.
Orbital strikes, my friend.
That's an epic email. Nice. Nice.
Yes, a lot of lore bombs in there.
So many facets. Yeah.
I do like the idea of orbital strikes in every game. I'd be good with that. I have no problem with that, really. Actually, that's one of the things I do really appreciate about Jedi Starfighter. Even though it was a short development process, we actually managed to string together the missions a lot better. There's a story that goes across a whole bunch of the missions that all tie together with Nim losing and then regaining his base and blowing the lid off of it, and it's a lot of fun. I mean, originally that was there in Starfighter, but we had to cut 7 missions or something like that to get it done.
Oof, yeah.
That was fun. I remember you going through that.
Nim's a great character too. It's too bad there's not more of him around.
It is too bad. And R.I.P. Charlie Rocket.
Yeah. So. Yep. I was going to say that too.
All right. Well, I guess that will be our show. Thank you so much for joining us. Those emails, we still have a few more emails to read. We'll get to those next time. And hopefully we can get some more pictures of Tim. But those were sent to devgameclub@gmail.com. And you can find us on the web at devgameclub.com. And you can find us on Twitter at devgameclub, where you'll also find Tim's picture and my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr., but you won't find the picture on that account. You'll have to look someplace else.
Yes, with, of course, a JR at the end. You can find me streaming at twitch.tv/Brett Douville. I have finished Kirby and I'm pummeling on towards the end of Epic Mickey. So that's still
pummeling.
happening.
That's a good description
I am being pummeled
happened.
along to the end of Epic Mickey. Who knows how much longer that will go. We are currently voting between Final Fantasy VI or Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars for the next game. So come by and cast your vote.
Interesting.
Yeah, a couple of JRPGs from the SNES era. So I felt like I needed more of that in my life. In any case, our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton and commissioned by friend of the cast, Aaron Evers. Thanks so much for listening to us chat with old friends this week, and good night.
Good night.